the relationship between man and machine has always been an ever-increasing source of contention. There's no disputing the exponential complexity and growth of technology is now interwoven into the fabric of our everyday lives, and is here to stay. But the biggest worry is not the devastating effect dropping your iPhone down the toilet can do to your eBay purchasing power, but more the ability to create devastating technological weapons. And in 1993, DMA Design and Psynosis unleashed their vision on Amiga owners. Walker is set in a period known as the Time Wars, which broke out in the year 2370 between the Mearnians and the Endelions. What ensues is a cat and mouse game where the Endelions send troops back to key points in time to obtain the strategic upper hand by destroying Walker production. With only one Walker operational, the Mearnians use intel to send it time hopping to destroy 4 Endelion bases, thus meaning they cease to exist in the future, or the present, who knows. Sci-fi fans are sure to get a bit of a kick from the time travelling escapades, but the game itself is very light on narrative, choosing to focus on how much destruction and chaos you can cause. After a brief and brutal intro sequence, the pre-game option screen only presents a scan easy or arcade option, unless you have 2 megabit of chip RAM present and you get some extra audio bells and whistles. Easy mode isn't easy. In fact, it's just as challenging as arcade mode, but only gives you access to the first 2 levels, after which you'll be greeted with a game over screen displaying your burnt out husk and telling you to try arcade mode. Cheeky. Stomping our way into the first level, the first thing that strikes you is the Walker model itself. Its grey and blue hulking frame is meticulously detailed and animated as its metallic chicken legs pound the ground. The oversized head swings around in pseudo 3D as it tracks your aiming reticule, and looks very impressive in doing so. Another pleasant surprise is that stage scrolling is right to left, as opposed to the traditional left to right. A small detail, but one that makes it feel a little inventive, despite the simplicity of the idea. As you march onwards, destroyed buildings are conveyed in a 2-tone colour scheme, with their hues changing as you progress to each of the 4 stages. As an artistic choice, it works well in conveying the tone of a bleak, post-apocalyptic future, or past, depending on what level you're playing. While a little repetitive, and some of the scaling in relation to the Walker and enemies could be called into question, they're nicely drawn as you make your way by the dilapidated sunken structures. Something that Walker definitely gets right, and revels in, is the viciousness of its action. Only when you come across your first enemy regiment does the realisation of this imposing killing machine hit home, as you tear through the cannon fodder with your twin machine guns. The Lemming-style troops are reduced to a bloody mess either by weaponry or a quick step onto their frail human bodies. These grunts are backed up by an assortment of armoured vehicles, ranging from the horse-drawn artillery cannons of 1940s Berlin to the Terminator-inspired hunter-killer air force of the future. There's plenty of variation. Walker is compelling in its visual chaos. Shrapnel flies, blood spurts and planes explode, leaving you breathless as you try to keep track of the masses of adversaries attacking you. While the art style isn't particularly unique, it feels cold and precise, perfectly fitting as you pilot the murderous machine. As development on Walker started straight after Blood Money, before being postponed, it seems like Raymond Usher's title theme is almost a continuation of the former's heavily sampled tunes. The ominous drones give way to digitised speech, wandering keyboard melodies and air raid sirens. It's a typical mashup of styles and one that seems at odds with the rest of the game's soundtrack. With the graphical style intentionally bleak, the in-game audio work is sparse and reinforces the despondent tone. With no music to kill to, the dying screams of your foes take on more prominence. Choppers thundering, planes swoop and explosions ring out in a suite of very impressive sampled effects. Normally I'd bemoan the lack of in-game music, but with so much destruction going on, its omission was a good decision in order to heighten impact and stop the audio devolving into a muddled mess. The Walker's mechanised movements and ringing machine gun bursts are rousing, as bullets ricochet off fortified personnel carriers, harbouring would-be assailants. But if you were lucky enough to have 2 megabit of RAM back in 1993, or upgraded to an A1200, you were treated to a quality but limited range of conversations between the Walker pilot and headquarters. There's nothing really insightful, but they certainly contribute to the atmosphere as you're warned of incoming ground troops, asked to check in, or shout out a well-timed hoorah as you decimate the populace. For the time, Walker had quite a unique control scheme whereby the reticule would be mapped to the mouse, while walker movement was initiated by the arrow keys or joystick. This means the game technically has two-player co-op, although the person tasked to control the mech might feel shafted. The left mouse button will unleash the guns while the right mouse button activates a lock-on, which will be very much needed for the faster and airborne enemies. Your gun will overheat, so you need to temper your fire, with the player alerted to this via audio and visual cues. The controls feel fast and responsive, which is a good job as you're going to need all the assistance you can get. With only 4 levels, each segmented into halves, the game could be completed in around an hour. However, the difficulty in Walker is punishing. It's so punishing in fact that completing it without trainers would be a greater feat than trying to stick toothpaste back in the tube. You will make progress with every attempt as you strategise which enemies to pick off first, but will most likely hit a wall around level 3. While enemy attack patterns are relatively predictable, it's dealing with the sheer number of them that proves troublesome, making Walker some self-flagellating exercise in crowd control. What do you prioritise? A handful of troops, or the Mad Max style dune buggy that fires homing missiles? Choose the latter, and that handful of troops soon becomes a regiment, launching a hail of grenades and depleting your health quickly. There's also mine layers and engineers who will try and plant explosives on your weak spot, the heatsink, and once up there, you better shake them off. Adding these into the mix creates a little extra dynamic to the gameplay as traversal becomes more dangerous than simply plodding from A to B. Prioritising who to take out first will only get you so far. Dexterity will carry you the rest of the way, as the best plan of action is to kill everything as quickly as possible, except the horses. And this is probably the one bit of nuance Walker's action has. If you send the horses pulling the heavy artillery to the glue factory, they will actually drop them closer to you, making them more of a threat. Each of the 4 levels has differing enemies and weapons for the era, as well as its own boss battle. These are formulaic in nature, as it's a case of taking them apart bit by bit. The exception is the missile silos that have to be dealt with before they launch the payload, meaning juggling between enemy factions requires extra efficiency and ruthlessness. Upon release, Walker garnered mostly favourable reviews from the Amiga press, and it's no surprise. There's a lot to like, helping the player forgive some of its shortcomings, of which there are a few. If you're looking for a shot in the arm of some adrenaline pumping, gory yet delightful carnage, there's a mech cockpit waiting for you to jump in. Walker might be a curious experiment for DMA Design, but one that feels perfectly at home on the Psygnosis label. Its simplistic yet extremely satisfying mechanics encourage you to come back despite the vicious difficulty. The high standard of the audio and graphical package is to be expected considering the talent behind it, but the game never becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Repetitive and short it might be, but war has never been so much fun.
Picked up some aerial targets ahead.